So one argument I've heard from people is that they don't like Dune because it's slow, it's boring, nothing really happens. But if you hold that opinion, anyone that holds that opinion, I'm telling you right now, you're completely wrong and your attention span is just cooked. Now what I mean by attention isn't just what's happening on a plot level. It's the sound design, it's the incredible foreboding score by Hans Zimmer, the cinematography, the lighting, and how all of it reflects the oppressive heat of the desert, the character design of the Harkonnens, and just the amazing costumes in general. I mean, the costume department really cooked here, and every element of the frame just evokes such a level of seriousness, and when all of these aspects are combined together, they elevate the story so much more, and you feel so immersed. And because of this seriousness, the film doesn't just ask for your attention, it demands it. It almost doesn't care whether you're into the story 100% of the way, or if you even understand everything that's going on. There's no easing you in, there's no hand holding. And in this way, the movie is unapologetically itself. And I think that's amazing. A lot of the time with other movies, it feels like a lot of energy is spent trying to win the audience over, to give them exactly what they're expecting. And sometimes potentially pleasing audiences becomes more important than actually portraying the subject matter in its most effective way, the way it's intended. And that's something I appreciate about Dune the most, because Villeneuve knows that every second on screen is precious. There's no time to waste in telling such a grand story, and it makes the story feel so important. And he actually respects the audience in this way, treats them like they're intelligent. And to the audience, what's communicated is, pay attention because something important is happening. But at the same time, I can see why this would rub some people the wrong way. I completely understand that this type of storytelling can be really jarring. And one thing I would agree with is that it does get hard to follow the story sometimes. Like if you aren't dialed in 100% the whole time, you can end up missing key exposition very easily. And that can leave you even more confused because of how the story just keeps on moving forward. Especially for a first time viewing, there's definitely going to be things that doesn't make sense to you. I mean, I've seen the movie like 5 times now, and every time I watch it, I pick on something new that I didn't even realize before. And on top of that, if you have no knowledge of the book or the lore going in, yeah, that's a long day for you. But I also think that's not entirely a bad thing, because a movie like this just compels you to rewatch it. It's not a movie you can just watch once, digest and move on. There's just too many moving parts, there's too much going on. Whether that makes you, crash out over it or lock in even more, the fact that it makes you feel something is much better than you just being indifferent to it. And I think another reason why people don't like this as much as the second movie is because it's more of a political drama. There's such a slow burn that takes place, and it just builds and builds and builds, and then poof, to be continued, see you in 2 years. We get this really abrupt ending, just as the conflict keeps heightening. You're like at the edge of your seat, left wanting more. And obviously that payoff that we get in part 2 is absolute cinema. But it wouldn't be the same if it didn't have the first movie to build up all that conflict in. But it gives the right breathing room to allow part 2 to really thrive. These two movies complement each other so much. Part 2 wouldn't have been nearly as great as it was if part 1 didn't carry all that build up. This hero's journey that we follow Paul on. The fall of the House of Atreides that represents not only a loss of those people, but the loss of morality, or what it means to be good and honorable, and this tragic descent into madness that we see our heroes go through, a madness they are too blind to accept. All of these beautifully complex themes evolve and grow across the two movies, and when you view them together, it starts to form a coherent story that could become part of one of the greatest trilogies of cinema. Yes, I'm looking at you, Lord of the Rings. When you go back to rewatch Dune 1 after watching Dune 2, it really puts into perspective how great it really is, because it gives you a chance to see the seeds being planted more intricately. It makes me appreciate the first movie more, and it's also what kind of drove me to make this video in the first place, because I've never enjoyed Dune 1 more than after rewatching it after the sequel. Let me take you back to the first act of the movie. Essentially this whole sequence that we can call Paul's test. This is where we see the motivations of the Bene Gesserit really come to life. A time where the political tension on Arrakis is so delicate, with power changing hands, and at the same time, Paul is in the midst of these witches and whatever they have planned for him. And this introduction of the Reverend Mother just looks like a scene from a horror movie, bruv. Like, there is no chance I'd be going into that room. She looks like she could kill you just by looking at you. And I think that look is made very intentional. It's almost as if it's a reflection of their dangerous and manipulative nature, and how powerful and influential they've always been. How the Atreides, Harkonnens and the Emperor himself are just mere pawns in their game, as we learn from the dialogue between the Reverend Mother and Lady Jessica after Paul passes his test. This is also the first time that we hear of the Kwisatz Haderach, or the One, the Mahdi, a mind powerful enough to bridge space and time. He goes by many names, but what does this actually mean? And what significance does this have to the rest of the story? To really break this scene down, we have to borrow from what takes place later in the movie and the sequel as well. Because one thing you have to appreciate about Villeneuve is exposition is never handed directly to the audience. And so the first thing to consider would be the Kwisatz Haderach in the context of the Fremen. Because to them, this is a prophesied savior, someone who will free them from the shackles of oppression that they have faced for so long. They call him the Mahdi, or the Lisan al-Ghaib, and it forms a core part of their religion. But this prophecy is not some sort of divine instruction or something that came down from the heavens to guide humanity, but a mere trick of the Bene Gesserit. We know that they planted this propaganda on Arrakis and on numerous planets centuries ago, and in so they have thousands of desperate followers waiting for the arrival of their prophesied savior. And from this scene, we can also infer that to become this figure is just about a matter of training, alongside being the product of thousands of years of crossing elite bloodlines. We also know Jessica is a highly esteemed sister of the Bene Gesserit, and that Paul has been learning from her from a very young age. I mean, that's his flipping mother, so why wouldn't he? But there's a logical reason for all of these qualities that we see Paul possess later on. He's been trained by the best of the best. But contrast this to the way the Fremen react when they see Paul. This aura of holiness that they create around him. It's not hard for Paul to do whatever the Lisan al-Ghaib is supposed to do. The ones who control him are also the ones who are responsible for writing the prophecy in the first place. And every time I see the Fremen being blindly enamored by Paul, I feel the sinisterness of the Bene Gesserit, because we know that their helplessness is just exploited by them. Basically, what I'm saying is Paul is not special, nor should he be treated as such. Even Dr. Yue says, they will always look after themselves more than doing the right thing, which is why they came up with this prophecy in the first place. And I think it reflects so much of real life. How many people or how many organizations, governments will actually do the right thing compared to doing something that's beneficial for them. Almost all the time, all of these organizations will choose what's right for them. And I think those selfish tendencies are reflected perfectly by the Bene Gesserit. And they have a great plan as well, because when the time is right, they'll be able to produce the superhuman, and they'll have armies of people ready to fight for their cause. Whatever their idea of a brighter future is, they're going to be able to take it, because people have been manipulated for centuries for this. And it's just a way to weaponize religion and hope and deceive innocent people into thinking they're fighting for this ultimate truth that is nothing but. And the most interesting part of this interaction is Noah saying that it was Jessica's pride and ambition that compelled her to even bring forth Paul, to raise a boy instead of a girl, in direct defiance to her teacher, to bring about the chosen one. Her arrogance that she could be part of something so monumental, but even more than that, her selfishness to subject an innocent child with so much responsibility, pain and suffering that will inevitably end up turning him into a monster. She seems like she does all of this in good faith, or maybe you can call it naivety, where she tries to convince Paul that the chosen one will actually lead them to a better future. And he's probably the biggest victim in all of this. He never asked to be burdened with such power or visions of the future, or even the ability to pass the test of the Gomchaba. But Paul's downfall is not just his own fault, but the fault of his mother as well. And we also see the Reverend Mother slightly panicking because she sees the potential in Paul to be the chosen one, but also the defiance of Jessica to train him without the knowledge of the Bene Gesserit, and how that may lead to him being uncontrollable, how he may not favor them in their positions of power once he becomes emperor. Above else though, the Bene Gesserit serve their ideals more than any personal grudge that they have. And that's what makes them so much more ruthless, because they don't operate off of ego. And on the off chance that Paul isn't the Kwisatz Haderach, they have so many more prospects too, such as Fade Ratha that we see in Dune Part 2. They're always planning, they're always scheming, they always have backups and contingencies for anything that may go wrong. And it kind of makes it incumbent upon Paul to succeed just to survive the game he's playing. The scene ends with Paul being given a shot to prove himself, to show the universe whether he has what it takes. And it's because of this very chance that allows both Paul and Jessica to survive the massacre of the Atreides. The Reverend Mother plots alongside the Emperor and the Harkonnens to wipe the Atreides out, but ensures that Jessica and Paul are kept out of it. You know, the path that was laid out in front of him was seeing his father, his friends, his whole family be slaughtered, and you know, having to live with that and keep going forward, and then still kind of fight for your life, even though he's supposed to be somewhat protected by the Bene Gesserit. You know, he's kind of their passion project. And this is exactly what Paul protests to, how they stir politics from the shadows, how he's being forced to play this game, and even when his mother says that he's supposed to lead them into a better future, he has to take this with a grain of salt. Does this mean a better future for all inhabitants of the galaxy, or just the Emperor, the Bene Gesserit, and other influential and powerful figures? Who gets to decide how better this future will be, and for who? And another thing that just elevates all of this is how serious the tone of the movie is right from the get-go. You know, we get a brief introduction to the oil of this universe and how colonialism and capitalism work together to exploit indigenous people of their land and resources, keeping them suppressed, controlled and powerless for generations. The stage is already set for such a serious discussion to take place between the film and the audience. It kind of hooks you in with that. And then you enter the Atreides, who are put in charge of spice production by orders of the Emperor, something that if they wanted to refuse, they could not. And you see the signs of danger looming about it, which is perfectly reflected in the sound design and the score. You know, Hans Zimmer just flipping killed it, man. And this impending sense of doom, this feeling that something bad is gonna happen, it just builds and builds and builds. You know, the deep vibrating droning, the inhuman voices, the color palette, the dramatic costumes, it's just all a marvel to witness and such a refreshing way to be introduced to a new world. And there's a few performances that I would like to highlight because these guys just flipping killed it. You know, Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto, Stephen McKinley Henderson as Thufir Hawat, and Benjamin Clementine as the Herald of the Change. You know, he was only in there for one scene, but you know, his whole demeanor, his whole look, it just grabs your attention as soon as you see him. And Rebecca Ferguson, obviously my goat. But you know, all of these guys, they just gave amazing performances, and you just feel it. You feel the world, you feel the impact of the actions of these characters. It just makes you feel so much. So if you got to this point in the video, guys, girls, just give it a rewatch. You know, it's not gonna hurt you. But you know, if you love the movie already, I hope I was able to add something new to your experience, or maybe we just share the same opinions. You know, follow me on Letterboxd, guys. I have a lot of reviews there. But if you still hate it, if you're not convinced, thank you for watching it through the end. You know, this is going to be amazing for my YouTube growth. But regardless, I just wanted to get that out there. You know, I think it was an interesting discussion. I hope you guys feel the same way, and leave a comment below. You know, tell me what you think of the movie, what your opinions are. You know, I'd love to have a discussion with you guys down there, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one, because I will have a lot more videos. You know, hopefully I post every week. I'm gonna have a video every week talking about all the movies I love. But for now,